The train's whistle pierced through the dry Colorado air as Adelaide Vincent gripped her worn carpetbag with trembling fingers, watching the dusty platform of Manassas come into view through the smudged window. And she wondered if the man who had written those careful, honest letters would recognize the desperation she had tried so hard to hide between her own hopeful words. It was late September in 1884, and the small town nestled in the San Luis Valley looked like every other frontier settlement she had passed through, except this one promised to be her salvation or her final disappointment. Adelaide was 22 years old, and she had left behind nothing but debts and sorrow in St. Louis. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving her with his gambling obligations and no prospects for respectable work that would not see her in a factory or worse. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like a lifeline thrown across the distance, and Franklin Xavier's letters had been kind without being flowery, practical without being cold. The train lurched to a stop, and Adelaide smoothed down her best traveling dress, a dove-gray wool that had seen better days but was still presentable. She had pinned her auburn hair carefully that morning, though the long journey had loosened several strands. Her reflection in the window showed a pale face with large hazel eyes that her mother had once said were her best feature. She hoped Franklin Xavier would think so too. Stepping down onto the platform, Adelaide was immediately struck by how different the air felt here. It was thinner somehow, and the mountains in the distance were unlike anything she had seen back east. The Sangre de Cristo Range rose up like jagged teeth against the brilliant blue sky, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The September sun was warm, but there was a crispness to the breeze that spoke of the harsh winter to come. "Miss Vincent." Adelaide turned toward the voice and found herself looking at a man who stood a full head taller than her own modest height. Franklin Xavier was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark brown hair that touched his collar and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His eyes were a striking gray blue, like storm clouds over water, and they held a mixture of hope and uncertainty that likely matched her own expression. He wore clean denim trousers, a plain cotton shirt under a leather vest, and a brown hat that he quickly removed when she met his gaze. "Mr. Xavier," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, I am Adelaide Vincent." "Franklin," he said immediately. "Please, just Franklin." He twisted his hat in his hands, and Adelaide noticed they were large and work-roughened with old scars across the knuckles. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Adelaide admitted, "but I am grateful to be here." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers bound by letters and necessity, searching each other's faces for signs of what their future might hold. Then Franklin seemed to collect himself and reached for her bag. "Let me take that. I have a wagon just over there. I thought we might stop by the boarding house first so you can freshen up, and then we can talk about the arrangements. Mrs. Patterson runs the place, and she is a kind woman. She will make you comfortable." Adelaide nodded, following him across the platform to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to two patient horses. Franklin set her bag in the back with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, and Adelaide felt a flutter of something she could not quite name. As they drove through the main street of Manassas, Franklin pointed out the various establishments. The general store, the saloon, the church, the smithy, and the small schoolhouse that served the handful of families in the area. It was a modest town, barely more than a collection of wooden buildings along a wide dirt road, but there was something honest about it that appealed to Adelaide. "The ranch is about 5 miles east of here," Franklin explained as they rolled past the last of the buildings. It is not much yet, but I have been building it up for the past 4 years. I have about 200 head of cattle, a decent barn, and a house that is solid enough to keep out the weather. I have been working on expanding it because I thought, well, I hoped that you would come and that you might want more space. There was such earnest vulnerability in his voice that Adelaide felt her chest tighten. I am sure it will be wonderful. Your letters made it sound like a good place. I tried to be honest about what life here would be like, Franklin said, glancing at her. It is hard work, and winters can be brutal. We are at 7,500 feet elevation here in the valley, and supplies can be difficult to get when the snow comes. But the land is good, and the water is clean, and I have plans to make it better every year. I appreciate your honesty, Adelaide said quietly. I was honest in my letters too about my circumstances. I want you to know that I will work hard. I can cook and sew and manage a household. I will not be a burden to you. Franklin pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a 2-story building with a hand-painted sign that read Patterson's boarding house. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his storm-colored eyes made Adelaide's breath catch. Miss Vincent, Adelaide, I want you to understand something right now before we go any further. I did not bring you out here to be my servant or my burden. I brought you here because I hoped we might build something together. A partnership, a life. I know we do not know each other yet, but I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret coming here. I will protect you, provide for you, and respect you. And I hope that in time, we might find more than just an arrangement between us. Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. That is all I could hope for, Franklin, truly. He smiled then, and it transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. Good. Now let us get you settled, and then we can discuss the practical matters. Mrs. Patterson was indeed a kind woman, round and maternal, with flour permanently dusting her apron and a smile that reached her eyes. She showed Adelaide to a clean room on the 2nd floor and promised hot water for washing. Franklin said he would return in 2 hours, giving Adelaide time to rest and compose herself. Alone in the room, Adelaide sank onto the narrow bed and let out a shaky breath. Franklin Xavier was not what she had expected. She had braced herself for someone harder, more calculating, perhaps even cruel. Instead, she had found a man who seemed as nervous as she was, who spoke of partnership and respect, who had storm-cloud eyes that held promises she desperately wanted to believe. She rose and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, washing away the grime of travel. As she unpinned her hair and brushed it out, she thought about the life that had led her here. Her mother had died when she was 15, and her father had slowly drunk himself into the grave over the following years, gambling away what little they had. Adelaide had worked as a seamstress, but the wages were barely enough for rent, let alone her father's debts. When he finally passed, the creditors had come calling, and Adelaide had realized she had 2 choices: sell herself in one way or another, or find a man who might offer her a different life. Franklin's advertisement had been simple and direct. Rancher in Colorado seeking a wife. Must be hardworking and honest. Will provide a good home and fair treatment. It had been the phrase fair treatment that had caught her attention. Not promises of riches or romance, but simple fairness. Adelaide had written back, and his response had been prompt and thoughtful. Over 6 months of correspondence, she had come to appreciate his steady nature and practical wisdom. He had never made promises he could not keep, and he had answered all her questions about life on a Colorado ranch with patient detail. Now she was here, and the reality of her decision was settling over her like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow, they would likely go before the local preacher and make their arrangement legal and binding. She would become Adelaide Xavier, wife of a rancher, mistress of a house she had never seen, in a territory that was still raw and untamed. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Vincent," it was Mrs. Patterson's voice. "Mr. Xavier is downstairs when you are ready." "Thank you. I will be right down." Adelaide pinned her hair up again, pinched her cheeks to bring some color back to them, and descended the stairs. Franklin was waiting in the boarding house parlor, hat in hand once more, and he stood when she entered. "I thought we might have supper here," he said. "Mrs. Patterson sets a fine table, and then we can talk about tomorrow." The meal was simple but hearty: roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. Franklin ate with the efficiency of a man used to taking his meals alone and quickly, but he made an effort to slow down and engage Adelaide in conversation. He asked her about St. Louis, about her journey west, about her impressions of Manassas. In turn, she asked him about the ranch, about the cattle, about his life before he came to Colorado. "I grew up in Kansas," Franklin told her, pushing his empty plate aside. "My father was a farmer, but the land was hard and the crops were unreliable. When I was 19, I decided to head west and try my hand at ranching. I worked for other men for several years, learning the business, saving every penny I could. When I heard about land opening up here in the San Luis Valley, I came down and filed a claim. That was 4 years ago. It has been hard work, but I have built something I can be proud of." "You did this all alone?" Adelaide asked, impressed despite herself. "Mostly. I have a hired hand who helps with the cattle and the heavier work. His name is Tommy Green, and he is a good man, a bit young and prone to practical jokes, but reliable when it counts. He has a cabin on the property, so you would not be alone with me without some propriety." Adelaide appreciated that consideration more than she could say. "And tomorrow?" Franklin met her eyes steadily. "Tomorrow, if you are willing, I would like to call on Pastor Hughes and have him perform a simple ceremony. Nothing elaborate, just the legal words that need to be said. Then I will take you out to the ranch, and you can see your new home. If at any point you feel uncertain or want more time, you need only say so. I will not rush you into anything." "I came here to marry you," Adelaide said softly. "I knew what I was agreeing to when I boarded that train. I am willing to go forward tomorrow." Something flickered in Franklin's expression, relief mixed with something deeper. "Then tomorrow it is. I will call for you at 10 o'clock if that suits you." "That suits me well." They parted at the foot of the boarding house stairs, and Adelaide returned to her room with her mind whirling. She barely slept that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town, the distant howl of coyotes, the creak of wagon wheels on the main street, the low murmur of voices from the saloon down the way. When dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Adelaide rose and dressed in her best remaining outfit, a navy blue dress with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. She braided her hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, then pinned a small cameo brooch that had been her mother's at her throat. Mrs. Patterson insisted she eat breakfast, though Adelaide could barely choke down the eggs and toast. At precisely 10 o'clock, Franklin arrived wearing a clean white shirt, a black vest, and dark trousers. He had shaved and slicked his hair back, and he carried a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers that he offered to Adelaide with an almost shy expression. "I thought you might like these," he said. "They are not much, but they grow wild near the creek on my property." Adelaide took the flowers, their bright colors like a promise against her dark dress. "They are beautiful, thank you." The ceremony at the small church was brief and witnessed by Mrs. Patterson and Tommy Green, who Franklin introduced as his ranch hand. Tommy was perhaps 19 or 20, with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles. He grinned at Adelaide and welcomed her warmly, with none of the suspicion or judgment she had feared. Pastor Hughes was an older man with kind eyes and a sonorous voice. He spoke the traditional words, and Adelaide found herself repeating her vows in a voice that grew steadier with each phrase. When Franklin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were surprisingly steady, and when he kissed her at the pastor's instruction, it was a brief, gentle press of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything Adelaide had experienced before. And just like that, she was married. Adelaide Xavier, wife of a Colorado rancher, bound by law and before God to a man she had known in person for less than 24 hours. Franklin helped her into the wagon, and they headed east out of town with Tommy riding alongside on horseback. The road was rough, little more than a wagon track through the scrubland, but Franklin navigated it with practiced ease. As they crested a small rise, he pointed ahead. "There, that is home." Adelaide looked where he indicated and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. The house was a simple structure of wood and stone, single-story but well-built, with a covered porch and real glass windows. Beyond it stood a large barn painted red, several smaller outbuildings, and a series of corrals where cattle grazed. A creek glinted silver in the sunlight, winding through the property and providing the precious water that made ranching possible in this arid land. "Franklin, it is wonderful," Adelaide breathed, and she meant it. The ranch had a settled, cared-for quality that spoke of Franklin's dedication and hard work. "It needs a woman's touch," Franklin said, pulling the wagon up in front of the house. "I am good at building and fixing, but I am hopeless at making a place feel like a home." Tommy helped unload Adelaide's meager belongings, then tipped his hat and excused himself to return to his work. Franklin opened the front door and gestured for Adelaide to enter first. The interior was as practical and well-maintained as the exterior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large iron stove, a sturdy table and chairs, and a comfortable-looking sofa near the fireplace. Curtains hung at the windows, though they were plain and sun-faded. To the left was a doorway that led to what Franklin explained was the bedroom, and to the right was a smaller room he had been using for storage, but had cleared out in anticipation of her arrival. "I thought you might want that room for sewing or whatever you would like," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "The bedroom is, well, I have been sleeping on the sofa, and I will continue to do so until you feel comfortable with other arrangements. I meant what I said about respect, Adelaide. We may be married in the eyes of the law, but I want you to feel safe here." Adelaide turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband, who kept surprising her with his consideration and decency. "You would sleep on the sofa in your own house." "It is your house now, too," Franklin said simply. "And I would rather sleep on the sofa for 100 years than have you afraid of me." Something warm unfurled in Adelaide's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Thank you, Franklin. That means more to me than I can say." Over the following days, Adelaide began to find her rhythm in her new life. She woke with the sun and prepared breakfast while Franklin and Tommy handled the morning chores. She swept and scrubbed, bringing order to the house that had clearly been maintained by a bachelor. She discovered that Franklin had a surprising number of books, everything from agricultural manuals to volumes of poetry, and when she mentioned it, he admitted with some embarrassment that he enjoyed reading on the long winter evenings. "My mother taught me to read," he said. "She was a schoolteacher before she married my father, and she believed education was important even for a farmer's son. I am grateful for it now." Adelaide also began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She watched Franklin and Tommy work with the cattle, herding them to fresh grazing, checking for illness or injury, repairing fences that had been damaged by weather or wildlife. It was endless, backbreaking work, and yet Franklin approached it with a steady determination that she found admirable. In the evenings, they would sit together at the table, and Franklin would tell her about his plans for the ranch. He wanted to increase the herd, improve the breeding stock, perhaps eventually add horses to their operation. He spoke of building a better irrigation system to make use of the creek water, of planting windbreaks to protect the property from the harsh winter winds that swept down from the mountains. "It is a dream," he admitted one night, his eyes distant. "Maybe an impossible one. But I want to build something that will last, something I can be proud of." "It is not impossible," Adelaide said firmly. "Not if you are willing to work for it, and you clearly are." Franklin looked at her then, really looked at her, and Adelaide felt her pulse quicken. Over the past week, she had found herself noticing small things about him. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he forgot to push it back. The calluses on his hands that spoke of honest labor. The rare smile that softened his weathered features. The gentle way he treated the animals, even when they were being stubborn or difficult. "I am glad you are here, Adelaide," he said quietly. "I know this was not what you might have chosen if circumstances had been different, but I want you to know that I am grateful. You have already made this place feel more like a home than it ever did before." "I am glad to be here too," Adelaide replied, and she realized with some surprise that it was true. Despite the strangeness and the uncertainty, despite being so far from everything she had known, she felt more at peace here than she had in years. As October arrived and the aspens turned gold in the high country, Adelaide and Franklin continued to navigate their unusual marriage. They were polite with each other, considerate, but there was a distance between them, a careful formality that neither seemed willing to breach. Franklin still slept on the sofa, though Adelaide had begun to feel guilty about it. She could hear him moving restlessly in the night, and she knew the furniture could not be comfortable for a man of his size. One evening, as they were washing the supper dishes together, Adelaide finally broached the subject. "Franklin, you cannot continue sleeping on that sofa. I can see that you are not getting proper rest." He paused in drying the plate he was holding. "I am managing fine. You are not, and we both know it." Adelaide took a breath, gathering her courage. "We are married, legally and in the eyes of the community. And I would not object to sharing the bedroom, properly, I mean, as husband and wife." Franklin set down the plate very carefully, as if afraid he might drop it. "Adelaide, I do not want you to feel obligated. I do not feel obligated. I feel like we are both tiptoeing around each other, and it is not necessary. You have been nothing but kind and respectful to me. I trust you, Franklin." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Franklin turned to face her fully, his storm cloud eyes searching hers. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." That night, Adelaide lay in the darkness of the bedroom, listening to Franklin moving around as he prepared for bed. She heard the rustle of clothing, the sound of water being poured for washing, and then the door opened quietly and he slipped into the room. The bed dipped as he lay down, carefully keeping to his side, maintaining a respectful distance. "Good night, Adelaide," he said softly. "Good night, Franklin." Adelaide closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the sound of his breathing in the darkness. It was strange and intimate and oddly comforting all at once. As the weeks passed and autumn deepened into early winter, Adelaide and Franklin's relationship began to shift in subtle but significant ways. They were more comfortable with each other now, more natural. Franklin would touch her hand when he passed her something at the table. Adelaide would place her palm on his shoulder when she looked over his work as he mended tack at night. These small gestures of affection felt monumental, like they were building toward something neither of them quite dared to name. One particularly cold morning in late November, Adelaide woke to find that Franklin had already risen and left the house. She dressed quickly and went to start breakfast, but when she looked out the window, she was struck by the beauty of the scene before her. The first significant snow of the season had fallen during the night, and the world was transformed into a pristine white landscape that glittered in the early morning sun. Franklin and Tommy were already out moving cattle to the winter pasture closer to the barn, and Adelaide could see their breath steaming in the cold air. She made coffee and biscuits, and when the men came in, stamping snow from their boots, she had hot food ready for them. "It is going to be a hard winter," Tommy said cheerfully, warming his hands around his coffee cup. "Old Pedro at the general store says he has not seen the snow come this early in 5 years." "Then we had better make sure we are prepared," Franklin said, but his eyes were worried. Over the next few days, they worked frantically to ready the ranch for the harsh months ahead. They moved all the cattle to the closer pastures, stocked the barn with hay, repaired any weak spots in the outbuildings, and laid in supplies from town. Adelaide worked alongside the men, helping where she could, and Franklin seemed grateful for her assistance. One afternoon, as they were hauling the last of the supplies into the house, Franklin caught Adelaide's arm gently. "You should not be doing this heavy work. It is too much." "I am stronger than I look," Adelaide protested, but she was breathing hard from the exertion. "I know you are. You are the strongest woman I have ever met." The sincerity in Franklin's voice made Adelaide's breath catch. "But I worry about you. This climate, this altitude, it is different from what you are used to." "I am adjusting," Adelaide said, meeting his eyes. "And I want to help. We are partners, are we not? That is what you promised me." Franklin smiled, that rare, transforming smile that she had come to treasure. "Yes, partners." He hesitated, then very deliberately raised his hand and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. The gesture was tender and intimate, and Adelaide felt her heart skip. "Franklin," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. It was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding ceremony. This was real and urgent and full of all the longing that had been building between them over the past months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Franklin rested his forehead against hers, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "I did not bring you here just for a partnership," he admitted roughly. "I hoped, from the moment I saw you step off that train with hope in your eyes, that I could make you happy. That maybe somehow you might come to care for me. I know I am not much, just a rough cowboy with big dreams and little to show for them yet, but Adelaide, I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since your first letter." Tears spilled down Adelaide's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "You are not just anything, Franklin Xavier. You are the best man I have ever known, and I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since you gave me wildflowers on our wedding day." Franklin kissed her again, and this time Adelaide wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. They stumbled toward the house, still kissing, and when they finally made it inside and closed the door against the cold, Franklin swept Adelaide into his arms and carried her to the bedroom. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a true joining of husband and wife, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the warmth of their bed, Adelaide felt a completeness she had never experienced before. Franklin held her close, stroking her hair, and whispered promises against her temple. "I will never let that hope in your eyes fade," he vowed. "I promise you, Adelaide, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are to me." Adelaide pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You already have. You gave me a home, Franklin. Not just this house, but a real home, a place where I belong." Winter descended on the San Luis Valley with a vengeance. The snow fell thick and fast, and temperatures plummeted. Franklin, Tommy, and Adelaide settled into the routine of winter ranching, which mostly consisted of keeping the cattle fed and the buildings warm. The work was hard but satisfying, and Adelaide found herself loving the quiet intimacy of the long evenings spent with Franklin by the fireplace. They would read together, or Franklin would work on plans for spring improvements while Adelaide sewed. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams for the future, the small details of their days. Adelaide learned that Franklin had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh unexpectedly. Franklin discovered that Adelaide had a beautiful singing voice and would sometimes convince her to perform the songs her mother had taught her. On Christmas Eve, Franklin surprised Adelaide by bringing home a small pine tree that he and Tommy had cut from the high country. They decorated it with paper chains Adelaide made and strings of popcorn, and Franklin produced a small wrapped package that he presented to Adelaide with an almost nervous expression. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When Adelaide opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Franklin on one side and space for another image on the other. "I had it taken in town a few weeks ago," Franklin explained. "I thought you might like to have it. And there is room for your photograph too, or for our children someday if we are blessed with them." Adelaide threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Far from it," Franklin said, but he was smiling. "But I am yours, and that is enough for me." They made love that night with the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Adelaide thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. She had come to Colorado expecting nothing more than survival, and she had found love instead. The winter months were not without their challenges. There were days when the snow was so deep that they could barely open the doors, days when the wind howled like a living thing and the cold seeped into every corner despite their best efforts. They lost a few cattle to the weather, which grieved Franklin deeply, though he tried to hide it. One particularly brutal night in January, Adelaide woke to find Franklin's side of the bed empty. She pulled on her robe and went into the main room, where she found him standing at the window, staring out at the blizzard raging outside. "Franklin, what is wrong?" He turned, and in the dim light she could see the worry etched on his face. "Tommy went to check on the cattle in the far pasture before the storm hit. He should have been back hours ago." Adelaide's heart clenched. "Could he have taken shelter in the line shack? Maybe. I am hoping so. But if he is lost out there in this weather—" Franklin did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. They both knew what could happen to a man caught in a Colorado blizzard. "We cannot go looking for him until the storm breaks," Adelaide said, moving to stand beside her husband. "You would only get lost yourself, and then where would we be?" "I know. But he is my responsibility. If something happens to him because I did not go out there—" Adelaide took Franklin's hands in hers, forcing him to look at her. "Tommy is a smart young man. He knows this land. He will have found shelter. When the storm passes, we will go looking for him together, but right now, you need to trust that he is safe." Franklin pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "When did you become so wise?" "I married a good man who taught me about strength and hope," Adelaide replied softly. They spent the rest of the night waiting, neither able to sleep. As dawn broke and the storm finally began to ease, Franklin was dressed and out the door before Adelaide could even prepare coffee. She watched from the window as he saddled his horse and rode out toward the far pasture, and she sent up every prayer she knew that both Tommy and Franklin would return safely. Hours passed. Adelaide busied herself with chores, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, searching the white landscape for any sign of movement. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to set, she saw two figures on horseback approaching the ranch. She threw on her coat and ran outside, relief flooding through her. Franklin rode up with Tommy beside him, and while both men looked half frozen and exhausted, they were alive and whole. Tommy had indeed taken shelter in the line shack, but the door had been blocked by a snowdrift, and he had been unable to get out until Franklin arrived to help dig him free. Adelaide insisted both men come inside immediately and bundled them into the warm house. She made hot coffee and soup, and once they were both thawed out and fed, Tommy retreated to his cabin while Franklin collapsed onto the sofa, looking utterly spent. Adelaide sat beside him, running her fingers through his hair. "You found him. I knew you would." "I was so afraid," Franklin admitted. "When I could not find him right away, I thought the worst. Adelaide, I do not know what I would have done if something had happened to him. But it did not. He is safe and you are safe, and that is what matters." Franklin pulled her down beside him, wrapping his arms around her. "I love you so much, you know that. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Adelaide whispered. "So very much." As winter gradually released its grip and spring began to emerge, the ranch came back to life. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. The cattle, lean from the hard months, began to fatten up again. Franklin and Tommy rode out daily to check on the herd and repair the damage winter had wrought on fences and buildings. In late March, Adelaide realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be certain before she told Franklin, wanting to be absolutely sure before raising his hopes. When she was finally confident, she prepared his favorite dinner and waited until they were alone in the evening to share her news. "Franklin, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Franklin simply stared at her as if he had not quite understood. Then his face broke into the widest smile Adelaide had ever seen, and he was across the room in 3 strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "A baby." "Adelaide, we are going to have a baby. Careful," she laughed, even as tears of joy streamed down her face. "You will shake the poor thing loose before it even has a chance to grow." Franklin set her down gently, then knelt before her and pressed his forehead against her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one. This is your father. I promise you that I will love you and protect you and give you the best life I possibly can. You are already the most precious thing in my world after your mother." Adelaide ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with emotion. "You are going to be such a wonderful father." The news seemed to energize Franklin in a way that Adelaide had not expected. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to make the ranch as profitable as possible before the baby arrived. He repaired the house, patching every small leak and crack, and began building a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it until it was perfect. Adelaide, meanwhile, began sewing baby clothes and blankets, preparing for the arrival of their child. Mrs. Patterson in town gave her a stack of soft flannel and practical advice, and the other ranch wives in the area visited with gifts and wisdom gleaned from their own experiences. As summer arrived and Adelaide's belly grew round, Franklin became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, doing any strenuous work, or even walking too far from the house. Adelaide found it both endearing and frustrating. Franklin, "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one day when he physically removed a basket of laundry from her hands. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. You and the baby are everything to me." Adelaide softened, as she always did when confronted with his sincere concern. "We are fine, I promise, but you need to let me do something or I will go mad from boredom." They compromised, with Franklin allowing Adelaide to handle lighter chores while he took over the heavier tasks. In the evenings, he would read to her from his books, or they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. One warm August evening, as they sat together, Adelaide resting against Franklin's shoulder, she felt the baby move for the first time. She gasped and grabbed Franklin's hand, pressing it to her belly. "You feel that? The baby is moving." Franklin's face filled with wonder as he felt the small flutters beneath his palm. "That is our child in there, our son or daughter, alive and growing." His voice was thick with emotion. "Adelaide, thank you. Thank you for coming here, for giving me a chance, for making me the happiest man in Colorado." "Thank you for writing that advertisement," Adelaide replied, kissing him softly. "Thank you for bringing me here and showing me what real love feels like." As Adelaide's due date approached in late September, Franklin became increasingly anxious. He had sent for a midwife from the nearest town, a capable woman named Mrs. Sullivan, who had delivered half the babies in the valley. She arrived a week before Adelaide was due and set up in the spare room, and her calm, no-nonsense presence was a comfort to both Adelaide and Franklin. The baby decided to make its appearance on a crisp September morning, exactly 1 year after Adelaide had first arrived in Manassas. The labor was long and difficult, and Franklin paced outside the bedroom door like a caged animal, while inside, Mrs. Sullivan and Mrs. Patterson, who had ridden out from town, helped Adelaide through the contractions. "The baby is coming, Mrs. Sullivan announced as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. "One more good push, Mrs. Xavier." Adelaide bore down with all her remaining strength, and then suddenly there was a sharp, wailing cry that filled the room. Mrs. Sullivan held up a squirming, red-faced infant with a healthy set of lungs. "It is a boy. You have a fine son, Mrs. Xavier." The door burst open and Franklin rushed in, his face pale but determined. He made his way to Adelaide's side, and Mrs. Sullivan placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in his arms. Franklin stared down at his son with an expression of such pure love and awe that Adelaide felt tears stream down her face. "He is perfect," Franklin whispered. "Adelaide, he is absolutely perfect." "Let me see him," Adelaide said, and Franklin carefully transferred the baby to her arms. Adelaide looked down at her son, taking in his tiny features, his shock of dark hair, his little fists waving in the air. "Hello, sweet boy, we have been waiting for you." They named him Andrew, after Franklin's father, and Thomas for Tommy, who had become like family to them. Andrew Xavier was a healthy, hungry baby who seemed determined to make his presence known. The first few weeks were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Adelaide had never been happier. Franklin was an attentive father, waking with Adelaide during the night feedings, walking the floor with Andrew when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Tommy was equally smitten with the baby, and often volunteered to watch him while Adelaide caught up on rest or chores. As Andrew grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, laughing baby, the ranch prospered. Franklin's careful management and hard work were paying off. The cattle herd had increased, and prices were good that year. He was able to hire another hand, a quiet man named Samuel who worked well with Tommy, which freed up Franklin to spend more time with his family. One evening, as they sat together on the porch with Andrew playing on a blanket at their feet, Franklin took Adelaide's hand. "You remember what I promised you the day we met, that I would never let the hope in your eyes fade." "I remember," Adelaide said, squeezing his hand. "I think about that promise every day. I see you with our son, I see the home you have made here, I see the life we have built together, and I am humbled by it. You took a chance on a rough cowboy with nothing but a dream and hard work to offer, and you made that dream into a reality. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known, Adelaide Xavier." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You kept your promise, Franklin. Every single day you have shown me that I made the right choice in coming here. You have given me a love I never thought I would find, a home that is truly mine, and a family that makes my heart full. I have everything I ever wanted." Franklin leaned over and kissed her, a sweet, tender kiss that held all the love they shared. Andrew gurgled happily from his blanket, as if adding his approval to the moment. Over the following years, the Xavier Ranch continued to grow and thrive. Andrew was joined by a daughter they named Catherine, after Adelaide's mother, and then 2 years later by another son they called James. The house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Franklin adding on 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Tommy eventually married a girl from town, a sweet-tempered young woman named Sarah, and built a house on the property where they started their own family. The 2 families became close, their children growing up together, and Adelaide often thought how blessed she was to have such good people in her life. Franklin's dream of building something lasting had come true. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the valley, with a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Franklin had become a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish a proper school in Manassas. But despite all the success and growth, Franklin never forgot what mattered most. He made time for his children, teaching them to ride and work the ranch, reading to them in the evenings and showing them the value of hard work and integrity. He was devoted to Adelaide, still bringing her wildflowers from the creek, still looking at her with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding day, still keeping his promise to never let her hope fade. One evening, many years after that first train ride to Manassas, Adelaide stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of gold and rose. Franklin came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I was thinking about the day I arrived here," Adelaide said, leaning back against him. "I was so scared, so uncertain about what I would find. I had lost everything, and I was taking a chance on a man I had never met, in a place I had never seen. And now—" Adelaide turned in his arms to face him, seeing the silver that now threaded through his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes, the weathered skin that spoke of years spent building their life together. But his eyes, those storm cloud eyes, were the same as they had been that first day, full of love and devotion. "And now I have everything. A husband who loves me, children who make me proud, a home that is truly mine. You kept your promise, Franklin. Not just to never let my hope fade, but to give me a life beyond my wildest dreams." Franklin cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, the same hands that had built this ranch, that had held her through difficult times, that had delivered their children when the midwife could not arrive in time, that had provided for their family through hard work and determination. "You gave me just as much, Adelaide. More even. You took a lonely cowboy with nothing but big dreams and you made those dreams real. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something that will last beyond us. Everything I am, everything I have, is because you stepped off that train with hope in your eyes and gave me a chance to prove myself worthy of it." They kissed there on the porch as the sun set, and the stars began to emerge in the vast Colorado sky, the same way they had kissed so many times before, with love and tenderness, and the deep knowledge that they had found something rare and precious in each other. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing and playing, and from the distance came the lowing of cattle and the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. It was the music of home, of family, of a life built on love and hard work and kept promises. As they went inside together, hand in hand, Adelaide thought about that scared young woman who had arrived in Manassas so many years ago, carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag and a fragile hope for a better life. She thought about Franklin's promise to never let that hope fade, and how he had not only kept that promise, but had exceeded it in every way. The hope in her eyes had not faded. Instead, it had grown and flourished, nourished by love and partnership and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. It had transformed into joy, into contentment, into a bone-deep happiness that came from knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, as Adelaide lay in bed with Franklin's arms around her, she listened to the familiar sounds of their home and smiled into the darkness. She had taken a chance on a mail-order marriage to a stranger in a harsh land, and she had found instead a love story for the ages, a partnership that had weathered every storm, and a family that was her greatest treasure. Franklin pressed a kiss to her temple, and she heard him whisper the same words he had spoken on their wedding night so many years ago. "I love you, Adelaide Xavier." "I love you too, Franklin," she whispered back, "forever and always." And as sleep claimed them both, Adelaide knew with absolute certainty that the hope that had brought her here, the hope that Franklin had promised to protect, had not just survived but had become the foundation of a beautiful life. A life filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of dreams fulfilled. A life that had started with a leap of faith and a cowboy's promise, and had blossomed into something more wonderful than she could have ever imagined. The years that followed continued to bring both challenges and blessings. The Xavier Ranch weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns, and the changing face of the West as the frontier era gradually gave way to a more settled civilization. But through it all, Franklin and Adelaide faced each obstacle together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. Their children grew into fine adults. Andrew took over much of the ranch management, showing the same dedication and work ethic his father had demonstrated. Catherine became a teacher, opening a school for the ranch children in the valley, bringing education to families who might otherwise have had none. James, adventurous like his father, split his time between ranching and working as a guide in the mountains, helping newcomers navigate the challenging terrain. As Franklin and Adelaide grew older, they found joy in watching their grandchildren play in the same fields where their own children had once run. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, hands clasped together, watching the sun set over the mountains they had loved for so long. "Do you ever regret it?" Franklin asked one evening, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "Coming here, taking a chance on a stranger?" Adelaide looked at him, at the man who had been her husband, her partner, her greatest love for more than 3 decades. "Not for a single moment." "You gave me everything, Franklin. You kept every promise you ever made to me." Franklin raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You made it easy, Adelaide. Loving you was the simplest thing I ever did. Everything else, the ranch, the success, the family we built, it all came from that. From the moment I saw you step off that train with hope shining in your eyes, I knew my life was going to change. I just did not know how much better it would become." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, the distant murmur of voices from their children's homes on the property, the gentle breeze rustling through the cottonwoods by the creek, all combined to create a symphony of home and belonging. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been, desperate and frightened, stepping onto that train platform with nothing but hope to sustain her. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, all the choices and chances, the hardships endured and the joys celebrated. She thought about Franklin's promise, made so many years ago, to never let that hope fade. He had kept his promise, but more than that, he had transformed that fragile hope into something solid and real and lasting. He had built her a home, given her a family, shown her what true partnership meant. He had loved her through easy times and hard, through youth, and now into their golden years, with a steadfast devotion that never wavered. As the moon rose over the San Luis Valley, bathing the ranch in silver light, Adelaide leaned her head on Franklin's shoulder and felt a profound sense of peace. This was her life, the one she had built from nothing but hope and courage and love. This was her home, surrounded by family and filled with memories of a life well lived. And beside her sat the man who had made it all possible, the cowboy who had promised to protect her hope, and had spent a lifetime fulfilling that promise in every possible way. Together, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone, passed down through the generations that followed. In the end, Adelaide thought as sleep began to claim her that night in the warm bed she had shared with Franklin for so many years, it had all been worth it. Every fear, every doubt, every moment of uncertainty had led her here, to this place of belonging and contentment. She had arrived in Manassas with hope in her eyes, and Franklin had not only preserved that hope, but had helped her build a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. That was his true gift, she realized. Not the ranch or the home or even the family, precious as those things were. His gift had been believing in her, in them, in the life they could build together. His gift had been keeping his promise, day after day, year after year, until that fragile hope had transformed into an unshakable foundation upon which they had built their entire world. As Adelaide drifted off to sleep, Franklin's arms around her in the darkness, she smiled. She had found her home, her love, her purpose. And it had all started with a train ride, a leap of faith, and a cowboy's promise to never let her hope fade. A promise that had become the cornerstone of the most beautiful love story she could have ever imagined.